He burns eggs in the morning and destroys rival gangs by night. Dmitry Volkov is a walking red flag. He commands an illegal underground empire, and his body is covered in a map of violence. But to a lonely book editor named Ruby, he is just the guy who hopelessly burns beef stroganoff. He looks at her like she is a precious thing. Is true love worth a life of constant danger?
You and I are about to watch a massive train wreck happen in real time. Picture this: a freezing city street dripping with fog, and right in the middle is our main girl, Ruby Hayes. She has been stuck in isolation for 6 long months, absolutely starved for literally any human connection. Her friend hyped up this blind date, Julian, calling him a totally safe guy with bright blue eyes. But guys, listen to me, being that lonely completely is your survival instincts. It makes you ready to jump into traffic if you think someone will catch you. She goes to this date hoping for a sweet romance, but she is walking straight into a brutal trap. The whole vibe screams that a predator is about to strike. Here is a solid life lesson. When you desperately look for salvation in random strangers, you usually just invite your own absolute destruction. The scene cuts to the heavy neon glare of the Crimson Lounge, and the wind is absolutely tearing at Ruby. She is shivering in an outfit she picked just to look good, totally ignoring the freezing cold. Honestly, we have all been there, right? Sacrificing our own basic comfort just to get validation from a world that could not care less. Her glasses are totally fogged up, literally blinding her to the massive red flags ahead. The velvet rope enforces this wild dress code, a straight-up mind game to strip away her remaining confidence. The camera zooms in on her shaking shoulders, and you can see her natural defenses completely crashing down in the dark. She is totally exposed. The lesson here is loud and clear. The second you drop your personal boundaries to impress toxic people, you leave your most vulnerable parts wide open to getting crushed. The camera zooms right in on her shaking hands. Her knuckles are chalk white as she tightly grips this vintage purse like it is the only thing keeping her alive. She scans the sketchy club, looking for 2 specific things, a dark suit and a copy of her favorite Russian novel. When she spots this massive guy at the bar holding exactly those items, her desperate heart just explodes with fake hope. It is honestly tragic. When you are that starved for help, you will hallucinate a knight in shining armor onto the face of your own worst enemy. She projects her dream date onto this random dude, totally ignoring that his face is in the shadows and his hair is pitch black. The trap snaps shut right there. Remember this life lesson, guys. Seeing only what you desperately want to see, instead of the cold truth, is the fastest way to ruin your own life. The pacing goes totally off the rails here into pure chaos. To hide how insanely terrified she is, Ruby tries to act like this bold movie character. But putting on a fake tough guy act never actually protects you. Instead of walking up to him normally, she goes full drama mode. The camera spins as she grabs this total stranger by the chair, whips him around in the dark, and actually touches him first. It is one of those awful moments where you just want to scream at the screen. She thinks she is kicking off an epic romance, totally blind to the terrifying reality. With one reckless move, she basically gift wraps herself for an elite predator. It hits hard with a major life lesson. Masking your deep insecurities with fake confidence will usually drag you directly into a brutal fight you have 0 chance of winning. The second she touches him, all the background noise cuts out, leaving just the sound of her panicking heartbeat. The guy does not even flinch. A real apex predator never backs away when you touch them. They just swallow you whole. Instead of being shocked, he instantly flips the script and takes physical control. His huge hands lock onto her, pulling her right into his terrifying personal space. It is the raw reflex of a mob boss who owns every single room he walks into. Her romantic fantasy totally crumbles into straight-up panic. She smells expensive liquor and feels a grip like actual iron. When she finally opens her eyes, the sheer horror of her mistake hits her like a freight train. The harsh life lesson is obvious here. Acting entirely on impulse in sketchy situations leaves you totally at the mercy of people who play for keeps. You and I are going to unpack this insane moment together because this is where it gets crazy. We have all seen this toxic dynamic play out, that split second when total fear mixes with fatal attraction. On screen, we see her completely frozen, staring at the sharp, aggressive features of his face. He gives off a deeply lethal vibe. It is a brutal life lesson that the things most likely to destroy you often show up looking incredibly gorgeous. When the panic finally breaks through and she tries to back up, stammering out apologies, his giant hand stays glued to her waist. He completely denies her the chance to run. His voice drops into this terrifying, commanding tone that echoes in the dark. It is a sick reality check that true predators do not let you apologize and walk away. They take your mistake and use it entirely against you. This is where the absolute mental destruction of Ruby begins. While she is squirming to break free, his grip just locks in harder. Then he drops a total bomb on her, casually mentioning that her real date showed up 10 minutes ago, saw she was not there, and straight up left with another girl. Talk about a brutal hit to the ego, which is exactly what a toxic manipulator wants. He shows zero sympathy, literally chuckling at her total heartbreak. He is feeding on her misery, absolutely destroying her self-worth, all while his thumb traces her hip. That is not him being sweet, guys. That is a calculated move to test if she will submit to him. It drops a super heavy life lesson. The people who go out of their way to emotionally break you down are almost always the ones planning to use you like a pawn in their own sick game. Let us look at this terrible moment piece by piece, because his manipulation tactics are next level. He completely twists the story, calling her embarrassing mistake a brave move. Her brain is screaming at her to run, but the shame literally paralyzes her. When you freeze up from embarrassment, you basically hand the villain the keys to your life. She begs him to let her go, but she does it weakly, completely giving up her own power. Then he whispers this toxic line, claiming he is only holding her because she has not actually told him to stop. He is gaslighting her into taking the blame for his own aggression. When he finally drops his name, Dmitry Vulov, it sounds like King claiming his throne. The life lesson here is terrifying. If you do not firmly enforce your boundaries, monsters will gladly cross every single one of them. The camera zooms right into her face as the ultimate villain grooming phase kicks off. Dmitry repeats her name, nice and slow, like he just won a shiny new trophy. He slides right into interrogation mode, casually extracting her personal details. When she mentions she is an editor, he instantly uses that heavy Russian novel on the bar to his advantage. He fakes having the exact same interests to create this super toxic illusion of a soulmate connection. Finding stuff in common is great, but in a predator territory, it is just a fancy trap. He makes her think this awful mistake was actually fate. This totally messes with her head, tricking her lonely heart into thinking she met a dark protector. It gives us a chilling life lesson. An insanely fast, intense connection is usually just a toxic person figuring out how to break you. Check out how the shadows totally trap them right as he lets go, only to immediately tell her what to do next. He taps the empty bar stool next to him, which is straight up a boss demanding loyalty. When Ruby finally tries to grow a spine and whispers that grabbing her was basic assault, he hits her with a massive trick. He ties them together, claiming they are both equally at fault. It is honestly wild how sharing a guilty secret can tie you to a toxic person way faster than real love. When she hesitates, his voice turns into this low, scary growl that sounds like a polite question, but is definitely a threat. She totally caves and sits down, dizzy from the drinks and his mind games. The life lesson is brutal. The second you accept blame for a boundary they crossed, you give them a free pass to control your entire life. Now the whole vibe shifts into aggressive, high-level love bombing. Dimitri is showering her with massive attention, blowing up her fragile ego to totally fake levels. But underneath the charm, the guy is a walking vault of Mafia secrets. Sure, getting hyped up feels amazing when you are lonely, but a guy who hides everything is basically feeding you poison. He dodges every single question she asks, dropping tiny, fake hints about liking books and having a brother. As the liquor hits her hard, Ruby finally clocks the insane power gap here. She realizes she has been spilling her guts for 2 hours, while he is still a completely mysterious, terrifying stranger. This right here is a massive life lesson, guys. Over-the-top flattery is almost always a smokescreen used by shady people to hide their massive walking red flags. Gasping for some kind of control, Ruby tries to push back just a little bit. She awkwardly laughs and jokes that with all his intense secrets, he might actually be a literal mob boss. Guys, it is so painful to watch. Our gut instincts are always right, but we still try to joke away the massive red flags just to avoid an awkward moment. Dimitri handles it like a total sociopath. He gives this deep, rumbling laugh, dropping the scary guy act for a fake, charming, boyish smile. He feeds her this totally basic lie about working in imports and exports. But the camera catches this split-second delay before he answers. It is a flex. He is intentionally showing her a tiny piece of the monster inside, daring her to stay. The absolute life lesson here is simple. When someone shows you they are dangerous, believe them the very first time. Listen up, because you and I are about to witness the exact second this guy's steel trap completely snaps shut. Ruby sees the insane Mafia wealth, the raw power, the way he totally commands the room without raising his voice. But then she makes the ultimate rookie mistake. She projects her own crushing loneliness right onto this mob boss. Real talk, it is a hard truth of life that we often project our own broken pieces onto toxic people, hoping that fixing them will heal us. She seriously thinks she found a soft spot under all that ice. She completely misses the fact that a predator does not see isolation as a wound. To him, it is a sharpened blade. That heavy silence between them is not romance. It is literally just an apex predator calculating his fatal strike. The camera pushes in on Dimitri, and catch this, the guy fakes a perfectly calculated jaw clench. It is a flawless performance of a damaged soul. He lets the dark room swallow his face while whispering a low-key warning about who he really is. But when Ruby pushes back, he leans into the light, spilling his darkest secrets. Here is a life lesson. People always want to believe they are the one magical exception to a walking red flag. By straight up admitting he is a monster, he tricks her into feeling like his ultimate savior. He gently brushes her jaw, a smooth move that seals her fate while screaming dark ops. He says they are hedging to his place, and boom, fade to black. That was no date night invite. That was the thud of a prison door locking her in. Check out the sound design. in this scene. The loud rush of Ruby's heartbeat completely drowns out the room. Dimitri drops his words like heavy concrete blocks into deep water. Her nervous system knows she is boxed in with a straight-up killer, making her breathe super fast. The crazy part? Dimitri leaves the trap wide open, casually asking what she wants to do now that she knows the deal. He dumps the crushing weight of the decision right onto her lap. She has a clear shot to walk away and end this story right now. Instead, she leans in and asks for another kiss. It hits us with a brutal life lesson. Never mistake a toxic guy's polite warning for actual safety. His mouth claims hers in the dark, a totally calculated move meant to fry her last functioning brain cell. The vibe violently flips from the cool city neon to the blinding white of his massive penthouse the next morning. He was not holding her like a sweet boyfriend. That was the heavy iron grip of a mobster claiming his new turf. Her body is shaking with pure survival panic, but her brain tries to slap a romance label on it just to cope. That is how the human mind tricks itself when there is zero way out. She wakes up and the camera sweeps over the insanely high ceilings and a ridiculously huge bed. The layout is designed to make her feel tiny and cut off from society. Here is a quiet truth to remember for your own life. Sometimes the things that look like pure safety and luxury are really just beautifully decorated cages. She is not his partner. She is just a stolen prize. This silent morning scene is where the insane pressure finally shatters her mind. Ruby turns her head in slow motion, the sound of the sheets feeling loud enough to blow out your speakers. She is desperate to find a normal guy buried under the menace her gut is screaming at her to run from. In the morning light, Dimitri looks totally chill, his killer vibes turned off by sleep. It is a tragic flaw in human nature to look right at a sleeping demon and want to give it a hug instead of sprinting out the front door. She stares at his ridiculously built chest, meant for breaking bones, trying to match it with the quiet dude from the bar. Then the camera zooms in on his ink. In the dark, it was just rough lines. But in the harsh daylight, it becomes a terrifying Mafia map. The morning sun blasts over his shoulders, throwing heavy shadows on his tattoos. The camera camps out on those huge Orthodox crosses, the harsh Russian letters, and the stars blasted into his skin. These are not trendy ink choices. They are the brutal, earned badges of a hardcore criminal underworld. Finally, her body hits the red panic button. She needs to bolt and act like this crazy night never happened. Life teaches us a basic rule. When your raw survival instincts scream at you to get out, you sprint without looking back. She holds her breath, trying to sneak off the bed. But the millisecond she moves, his massive arm clamps right around her waist. His eyes are completely shut. The predator might be asleep, but the steel cage is fully awake. Check out how this shot is framed, exposing how fast he nukes her mental defenses. She starts stuttering lame excuses about being late for her shift, desperately hanging on to her normal life. The boss ignores her rambling and zeroes in on her heart, which is hammering out of her chest. He flattens his massive hand over it to feel that pure panic. He is not doing this to be sweet. He is measuring his terrifying hold over her. The hard life lesson here is that we waste so much energy trying to negotiate with toxic people who only respect absolute dominance. When she weakly tries to play it cool and says she does not do random hookups, his voice totally drops. He pins her against the pillows and whispers that this is absolutely not casual, completely blowing out her last spark of hope. Time totally glitches out here, locking them inside that blinding bedroom until way after lunchtime. This intense isolation is a wild cinematic move that cuts the signal to the outside world. The room is cold and intimidating, but look at the walls stacked with hundreds of beat-up books in a dozen languages. Ruby nervously laughs, admitting she thought his reading act at the bar was just a fake flex to pick up girls. His arrogant smirk barely touches his dead eyes as he fires back that he does not need cheap tricks. Here is your harsh reality check. When we are terrified, we latch onto any boring hobby to make a monster look normal. By obsessing over his reading habit, she is literally just painting the iron bars of her own cage so it feels like a cozy apartment. Let us hit pause and look at this together, because you and I are about to see the exact frame where the trap locks down. The boss paces the room with a menacing swagger, straight up flexing that he knows all of his own fatal flaws. When Ruby asks if she is one of those flaws, the vibe gets insanely tense. He immediately flips the script, demanding to know why she has not bolted yet. She tries to dodge it, whispering that he will not let her go. But he nukes that excuse, dropping the bomb that she is only still there because she wants the drama. The absolute hardest lesson in life is finding out your own toxic traits can be used against you. He makes her look right in the mirror and own the fact that her deep boredom is exactly what dragged her into his dark world. The craziest plot twist for Ruby is not the Mafia ink or the pure void in his eyes. It is the gut punch realization that this dude is entirely right. She secretly thrives on being trapped in this dangerous room. She tries to play it off with a nervous laugh, making a lame joke about how normal couples act on a first date. Dimitri does not even blink, smoothly firing back that they are just speed-running the relationship. The camera tracks him into the sleek kitchen, where this terrifying kingpin suddenly starts playing house and cooking breakfast. He even drops some casual lore about his mom. The life lesson here is crystal clear. A straight-up villain who makes you an omelette is still a villain. That fake domestic safety net just guarantees the inevitable violence later will hurt so much more. So here he is, chilling in the sunlight, dropping heavy lore about his strict mom and her wild expectations. He paints this totally heartbreaking picture of the boring suburban life with a wife and kids, then quietly sighs that he is completely locked out of that dream. Guys, this is an absolutely legendary manipulation tactic. He flashes just enough trauma to trigger her crazy urge to fix him. We make this massive mistake in life all the time, totally confusing a toxic person's sob story with them actually being safe. She watches it cook like a pro, completely blind to the giant bear trap snapping shut around her leg. He blames his dark family history for ruining his soul. And just like that, the terrifying mob boss is gone, replaced by a sad boy she feels destined to save. He posts up across the table and hands her this ridiculously fake illusion of freedom. He swears he will spill the whole ugly truth, promising she can walk out the front door right after. Then, without raising his voice, he drops the insane lore about his family's absolute death grip on the criminal underworld. You have to get what is really happening here. He is not doing a noble confession. He is stress testing the heavy psychological chains he's just locked around her brain. Listen, sometimes in life, incredibly dangerous people will show you exactly how crazy they are just to see if you are dumb enough to stay. He spoon-feeds her the most brutal details, totally loving the pure shock in her eyes. He is completely high on his own villain arc, daring her to stay in the splash zone. Let's break down this opening scene together, because it sets the stage for absolute chaos. The camera zooms in on Ruby, and you can literally see her brain short-circuiting. She stares at his obscene wealth and hardcore mob ink. She calls him a criminal, but does he sweat? Not even a little bit. He just smirks and calls himself a businessman with rough methods. Look at the sheer arrogance of this absolute unit. He spins a wild story about inheriting a dark throne to keep the streets in line. Here is a simple life lesson for you. A massive lie goes down way easier when wrapped in a tragic excuse. Ruby falls for it completely, seeing a wounded king instead of an apex predator. He does not ask for permission to be a monster. He just demands she accepts his twisted reality. On paper, Ruby has a golden ticket to walk right out that front door. Every single survival instinct she possesses is screaming at her to bolt and never look back. But the camera just lingers on her frozen hands. Guys, the emotional poison is already in her veins. She is literally weighing the bloody reality of his Mafia empire against the intoxicating heat of his attention. She asks why the Don himself would risk his life just to tell her the truth. He looks away, drops his voice to that deep rumble, and says kissing her brought a spark of light into his pitch-black world. Bro actually drops the word hope. Here is your life lesson. No trap snaps shut harder than the belief that you alone can save a broken soul. He casually drops the heavy weight of his salvation right onto her shoulders. Watch closely, because the vibe shifts in an instant. His voice cracks just a bit, and the camera locks onto Ruby, completely falling for this shadow's vulnerability. But then, the sharp sizzle and burning smell of ruined eggs totally shatters the tension. The big bad Mafia boss mutters a curse in Russian, entirely defeated by a frying pan. Ruby actually starts laughing. Not a cute giggle, but a breathless release of sheer panic. When he glares at her, she just points at the smoke. You and I have probably done this exact same thing before. The life lesson here is simple. Humor is our ultimate defense mechanism. We laugh at the scary, dangerous things, just so we do not end up screaming in total terror. The trap finally snaps shut, and it feels exactly like soft silk. Ruby steps right into the cramped kitchen, leaning into this wild domestic fantasy. She grabs the bread and murmurs about making toast, completely willingly. Dmitri just watches her with those dark, unreadable eyes. You are not running, he rumbles. She actually nods. He steps up, dropping his heavy hand on her shoulder like a possessive stamp of ownership. Then he whispers the ultimate Mafia line, telling her that his enemies will now see her as a target. It is a brilliant, manipulative move to make her feel totally irreplaceable. The life lesson here is harsh. When the villain warns you about the big bad wolves outside, he really just wants to make sure you stay locked away inside his own personal den. The real disaster kicks off when you see her jaw completely soften. Ruby is staring at a mob boss who thrives on breaking bones, and she casually overrides her own survival instincts. She tells him she knows there are no happy endings in this world. Guys, if she is mistaking her own reckless self-destruction for main character courage. She flashes a fragile smile and basically hands the Don the keys to her entire life. Dmitri catches the vibe instantly and pulls her tight against his chest. You are either incredibly brave or completely stupid, he whispers. What a masterclass in wrapping an insult inside a hug. The life lesson is uncomfortable but true. We constantly dress up our absolute worst mistakes as destiny, just to make the crash landing feel a little better. Watch how fast the walls close in on her. Dmitri casually demands her entire weekend, completely cutting her off from the safety of her normal life. He drags her down into his velvet-lined underworld, and Ruby eats it up like she is starving. She trades her boring, quiet apartment for the intoxicating rush of hanging with a literal apex predator. Over the next 2 days, the seduction is flawless. He walks her through high-end underground clubs, and heavily armed goons look at the floor when he passes, yet he pulls out her chair like a total gentleman. Listen up, because here is a vital life lesson. The most dangerous cages are never made of rusty iron bars. They are built purely from the blinding, golden illusion that you, out of everyone else, are the chosen one. Sitting in the dim light, they start trading their deep, dark trauma like absolute poker chips. Dmitri drops his voice and spins this brutal backstory about his harsh childhood, painting his mafia empire as some heavy burden he was forced to carry. It is a top-tier, calculated performance. And Ruby, desperate for connection after a lonely foster care childhood, hands him the exact cheat code to break her. She admits she just wants a real home. Boom. The trap snaps shut. By Sunday night, he is looking at her like she is a literal goddess, swearing she is the only person who gets him. It took 48 hours. The life lesson here is brutal. Bonding over your shattered trauma pieces does not build a safe fortress. It just builds a shared prison cell away from reality. The camera zooms right in on her shaking fingers as she traces the wild mob tattoos on his chest. Dmitri catches her hand and kisses her palm, spinning this dark fairy tale about fate, bringing her to his bar. Then he drops the ultimate tactical nuke. He whispers that he is falling in love with her. Bro, it has been 48 hours. It is a complete hostile takeover of her brain, perfectly timed to silence every red flag she has. Instead of running for the hills, Ruby just melts into the emotional high. She confuses a textbook psychological kidnapping for a romance movie. Pay attention, because we all need this life lesson. When an instant, massive spark feels like a miracle to save your life, you are probably just standing dead center in a burning trap. The real kicker is that she actually speaks the truth out loud. Ruby lists off every logical, terrifying reason why she needs to run away from this mafia boss. Her voice is totally shaking. But in the exact same breath, she admits she is falling for him anyway. Dmitri just gives her that slow, knowing smirk and leans in for a soft kiss to seal the deal. Cut to Monday morning, and the contrast is wild. The harsh office lights are beating down on her. She is wearing his oversized shirt and drinking the fancy coffee he bought her. It is a quiet stamp of ownership. The hard life lesson here is real. Getting psychologically trapped is rarely a screaming fight in the dark. Usually, you walk right back into the daylight, fiercely defending your own invisible chains. Back in her boring office, you can really see how far gone she is. Her best friend, Chloe, steps up, demanding to know where she disappeared to for 3 entire days. Cornered by someone who is actually thinking straight, Ruby physically backs away. She tries to brush off her weekend with a literal crime syndicate boss as a silly little mistake. Just kissed the wrong guy, she lies with this super fake laugh. Chloe just stares back, eyes wide with creeping horror, because she can see the absolute void behind Ruby's eyes. This is the wildest part of the downward spiral. The life lesson here is a super bitter pill. Losing your mind to a toxic situation almost never feels like falling at first. To the person diving in, it actually feels like they are finally flying. Let's pause and unpack this absolute mess together. Think about who Ruby was before this guy showed up. She was the smart girl who read the fine print and never sat with her back to the door. Now, she is casually building a massive wall of lies to shut out her old. Why? Because the brain rot is real. She spent the weekend with a violent mobster, but her mind only replays how soft his voice was. He hooked her on the heavy drug of feeling totally understood. When Chloe demands the truth, Ruby just dodges with boring corporate talk to shut the conversation down. The life lesson for our own world is clear. The exact second you start hiding your daily reality from the good friends who keep you grounded, you are officially lost in the sauce. The sharp buzz of her phone totally shatters the office vibe. It is a text from the Don, and his timing is absolute to perfection. Missing you already. Dinner tonight. He is setting this suffocating pace so her logical brain gets zero time to recover. The camera shows the real tragedy here. Ruby actually smiles at the text. It is so out of character that Chloe literally rips the phone away to see what is happening. Ruby just nods with glassy eyes, looking completely past her friend. She types back that she will be there, her brilliant mind totally dismantled by the mob boss. Here is our final life lesson. We all crave the massive rush of being wanted, but we forget that dangerous people easily manufacture the illusion of true love just to keep us exactly where they need us. When Ruby asks where to meet, Dimitri does not hesitate at all. My place, he says. I am making dinner. Sounds perfectly sweet, right? Wrong. This is a surgical strike to yank her off neutral ground and lock her inside his own heavily controlled environment. They trade playful banter about ruined toast, setting the date for 7. Later, over at a loud cafe, Chloe launches a total interrogation. Ruby feeds her friend a completely scrubbed version of the story. Just a random meeting at a dark bar with instant sparks. But when Chloe demands the catch, Ruby just shrugs and calls the guy complicated. Here is a simple truth to carry with you. When someone calls a brand new romance complicated, they are desperately burying massive red flags they are just too terrified to face. Chloe refuses to let this go, leaning hard across the table. Ruby just stares at her untouched salad, sketching a fuzzy picture of a guy weighed down by heavy stress. Chloe rolls her eyes, assuming he is just another burned-out finance bro, but then Ruby drops her voice to a whisper. She describes his towering frame, the dark hair, and those absolutely freezing gray eyes. She admits he looks like he stepped right out of a violent mob movie, the kind of face that makes you want to sprint away and lean in closer all at once. The danger itself is a brand new addiction. This brings up a really tough lesson about human nature. The people who lock their hearts behind the absolute thickest steel's doors are almost always the easiest ones for a true predator to completely shatter. Chloe watches Ruby, picking up on a truly terrifying vibe shift. For years, Ruby was the absolute ice queen, tossing guys aside after 3 months with total detachment. But now, she stares at her screen with blind infatuation. Dimitri fires over a photo of his wrecked kitchen, joking about his trash cooking. Ruby types back, and a genuinely unguarded smile breaks across her face. Chloe calls this sudden change unsettling, but Ruby just whispers that she is finally happy. Stick with me here, because you and I are watching the trap spring shut. He is using fake vulnerability to bypass her logic. It is a hard truth we all need to learn. We constantly mistake a curated moment of charm for a good soul, forgetting that a ruthless predator can still laugh and ruin a piece of toast. Chloe leans across the table, her voice shaking with dread, begging her friend to wake up. That heavy warning hangs over Ruby all day. Deep down, she knows Dimitri is a violent shadow wrapped in absolute chaos. But those twisted psychological roots are already burying deep into her brain. She craves the addictive high of his attention way more than she cares about her own safety. She walks right into his luxury penthouse anyway. The air is thick with the smell of scorched garlic and impending doom. Dimitri stands at the door, gently pressing a single finger to her lips in a quiet, devastating scene. Here is the greatest tragedy we face in life. When you ignore the screaming alarms in your head just because someone makes you feel special, you are locking your own cage from the very inside. Dimitri stands in the total wreckage of his kitchen. His hair is a mess, his expensive shirt stained with sauce. To anyone else, he looks like a regular guy defeated by a simple recipe. But this is the calculated theater of a mastermind. By playing the harmless fool, he completely shatters her defenses. The scattered pots and ruined beef stroganoff are just a carefully arranged stage play. He flashes Ruby a sheepish grin, claiming he mistranslated the Russian recipe, confusing a gentle simmer with an aggressive boil. It is a quiet flex of his violent roots, all while silently demanding her pity. The life lesson here is sharp. Manipulators will gladly play the helpless victim to control the narrative, using an engineered weakness to perfectly trap a willing heart. Watch Ruby's body language as she processes his frustration. She steps right into his space, wrapping her arms around his massive shoulders. In human psychology, this mimics the early stages of a hostage bond. She actually sees his failure to cook as a deeply endearing act of grace. Dimitri chuckles, pointing out the dark irony of a crime lord valuing an honest mistake. It is a brilliant deflection designed to normalize the actual blood on his hands. They collapse onto the kitchen floor, eating takeout food among the ruins of his experiment. Ruby believes they are sharing a rare, beautiful connection. Always remember this simple truth. Genuine intimacy can only grow in the soil of absolute safety. It can never survive in a temporary pause from a predator's violent reality. Dimitri points a scarred finger at the wrecked stove, joking he just found a new chemical element. Ruby throws her head back, laughing until her ribs hurt. But guys, pause and look at his eyes. He gives her this heavy, totally manufactured look of wonder. He whispers that 1 week ago he was stuck in the freezing dark, and now he is terrified she is just some passing ghost. It sounds like peak romance, but this is literal textbook love bombing. He casts Ruby as the only light in his dark world, dropping the massive weight of his survival straight onto her shoulders. Remember this life lesson. When someone makes you their absolute only reason for breathing, that is not true romance, and they are just quietly turning you into their psychological hostage. Caught in his sweet words, Ruby whispers she never wants to wake up. Stick with me, because we need to unpack this setup together. Right at her peak surrender, Dimitri drops a massive bomb. His Mafia boss mother wants to meet her. He frames this invite as a deadly threat he must heroically protect her from. He offers to lie to the crime matriarch, giving Ruby a totally fake way out. Watching this play out is just wild. By pointing to an exit door he knows she will never use, he manipulates her into walking into the fire on her own. It ties her to him through the crazy illusion of free will. Here is your life lesson. The hardest cages to escape are the ones we build ourselves. When we mistake a toxic trap for our own choice, we hand over our freedom with a smile. Ruby gasps as the insane stakes finally hit her. Meeting Elena is no standard dinner date. It is a brutal psychological audit run by the boss of a criminal empire. Dimitri leans close, warning her that his mother reads people like open books. Then he slides the ultimate hook right into place. He whispers that his mother will finally see a woman worth protecting, even from himself. This twisted paradox is the exact heartbeat of a trauma bond. The villain paints himself as the only shield against his own monstrous nature. Ruby agreeing to this is not some brave move. It just shows how deep the brainwashing goes. The real life lesson here is chilling. We can get so desperate for affection that we mistake the cold walls of a prison cell for a safe fortress. By the time we notice, the iron doors are locked tight. Dimitri touches her cheek, asking if she is actually sure about this. Ruby is trembling, admitting she is terrified, but she nods anyway. Watch this closely, because it is an absolute tragedy. She is burying her survival instincts just to keep this mobster happy. He whispers that he picked her because her soul mirrors his own. To a lonely girl, that sounds like pure salvation. In reality, it is just a predator securing his meal ticket. He feeds her the exact poetic lines she craves, so she walks right into the slaughterhouse. The life takeaway here is honestly terrifying. The most dangerous people in this world do not drag you away, kicking and screaming. They just make you feel so deeply understood that you gladly burn your own bridges to safety. They stay tangled up on the floor, acting like tomorrow is never coming. But morning always wrecks the fantasy. Now, we finally step into the Brooklyn brownstone to face the final boss, Elena. The second they walk in, Elena dissects Ruby with one cold look. She is this terrifying mix of silver hair and pure Mafia authority, without missing a single beat. Elena casually mentions how Ruby once kissed Dimitri while thinking he was another guy. Boom. That is a lethal, calculated sniper shot. By weaponizing an embarrassing secret from her past, Elena instantly shatters her armor. The simple life lesson here is that true power never has to shout. The quickest way to destroy someone is to calmly prove you already know their worst mistakes before the game even begins. Dimitri tries a weak warning, but Elena swats him away like a bug. She smirks, claiming she respects Ruby's wild energy, and pulls her deeper inside. The house smells amazing, but this warmth is a massive psychological mind game, hiding the bloody reality of their mafia syndicate. When Ruby mumbles that she expected a colder place, Elena just smiles and says the violent business stays outside. Then the steel trap snaps. Elena casually orders Dimitri to leave the room. Come with me here, because this is a pure masterclass in manipulation. By kicking her son out, she instantly cuts Ruby's only emotional lifeline. Always remember this vital lesson. The exact second somebody subtly separates you from your backup, the real interrogation has already started. Boom, the doors click shut and Ruby is officially trapped. Elena leans across the table, dropping her voice to this icy whisper. And guys, she does not even try to hide the violent rumors about her son. She literally weaponizes them. What we are watching right now is a brutal psychological stress test. Elena starts reading off Ruby's tragic foster care history, casually proving she has eyes everywhere. She is not here for small talk, bro. She is zeroing in on Ruby's trauma, calculating the exact pressure needed to make her snap. It is a harsh life lesson we all have to face eventually. A true manipulator is never going to comfort your broken pieces. They just study your deepest wounds so they know exactly where to stab you later. Absolute menace behavior right here. Look at this absolute madness, guys. Elena is totally dissecting Ruby's quiet little life like a literal surgeon. She twists Ruby's innocent love for old books, framing it as a paper-thin shield hiding her massive fear of abandonment. Ruby's hands are shaking, but she lifts her chin like a total boss. She whispers that she stays with this mobster because he actually sees her genuinely, believing he would burn the whole world down just to keep her safe. It is a crazy, devastating look at total surrender. Her terror of being left behind has deleted her basic survival instinct, trading reality for a ghost of a promise. It really shows you a wild truth about life. When you have starved for security forever, a dangerous guy's toxic obsession can look exactly like true love. Elena leans back with this completely cold smile creeping across her face, testing the final layer of this twisted conditioning. When Ruby confesses her own obsession terrifies her, the older woman nods with dark approval. She whispers that safe love is meant for boring people, romanticizing a life of pure chaos. Then she drops the bloody history of her dead husband, revealing the crushing guilt Dmitri carries over his father. It feels like a quiet moment of bonding, but man, it is actually a lethal bear trap. By handing over the map to her son's trauma, Elena drafts the girl right into their Mafia war. She is locking down a human shield. Always be careful around people who bond quickly through trauma. They usually just want someone else to bleed for them. The camera lingers, capturing the exact second this insane trap springs shut. Elena's voice is like velvet poured over broken glass, telling Ruby that surviving her son's chaotic orbit means she is either profoundly special or undeniably dangerous. It is a tragic trick, making the young woman feel like a queen among wolves. Right on cue, Dmitri steps out of the shadows to play the reluctant savior. Elena laughs and swirls her vodka, masking a literal death threat with a casual family joke. The lethal tension suddenly melts into this sick, cozy domestic vibe. This dizzying swing between mortal danger and warm laughter totally shatters a person's inner compass, forcing blind trust. The hardest lesson we ever learn is that the most comforting fires are the ones built to burn us alive. Enter Mila, slipping into the frame right beneath the glow of the chandelier. The sister plays her part flawlessly, acting as this harmless, bubbly distraction. She gossips about paperback novels, rolling her eyes at her brother's blood-soaked crime empire as if he merely worked late at some boring office job. She casually dismisses Dmitri's brutal nature as just the ache of a lonely soul, claiming Ruby alone has cured his dark moods. It is a beautifully orchestrated trap unfolding in real time. By turning a lethal killer's isolation into an endearing flaw, the family feeds directly into Ruby's tragic savior complex. They literally hand her the leash to the monster. The sad truth of life is that our desperate need to fix broken people is usually the exact thing that breaks us in return. The psychological conditioning settles deep into the bone. Mila gently rests her hand over Ruby's, begging her not to fear Dmitri's frozen exterior. She whispers this sweet, absurd story about him crying during a kid's movie. The camera pushes in as the killer is humanized, planting the false belief in Ruby's heart that a tender boy lives beneath the monster. Elena holds her gaze across the table, her voice dropping to a serious tone. She tells the girl Jean belongs here, whether she knows it yet or not. You and I can see the tragic reality dripping from the frame right now. This is not a warm family embrace. It is a literal life sentence. The cruelest lesson of all is that the most inescapable prisons are always the ones we lock ourselves inside with a willing, grateful smile. For one fleeting night, Ruby allowed her mind to feel the warmth of true belonging, but friction always follows a lowered shield. Morning brings a jarring text message. Julian has breached the perimeter and is pacing her office lobby. Instantly, Ruby's breathing turns shallow. It is a visceral trauma response. To her, Julian ceased to exist the second she kissed Dmitri. But Julian is bleeding from a shattered ego, his fragile pride screaming out for validation. Feeling totally ignored, he abandons all dignity, causing a volatile public scene just to force her attention. Life reminds us here, quite violently, that turning a blind eye to a problem never makes it magically disappear. Unspoken obsessions only fester quietly in the dark until they are ready to tear the doors off entirely. As Ruby steps into the lobby, She presses her fingers to her temples to numb the headache of her dual lives colliding. Julian stands waiting. On paper, this guy is the perfect catch. He wears a sharp suit, projecting the manicured stability of a television commercial. Yet today, his eyes are wild. He paces the tile like a starving animal, radiating the heat of a bruised narcissist. He blocks her path, demanding to know where she vanished to, humiliated to learn the truth from a friend. Instead of offering grace, Ruby meets his frantic energy with eyes as cold as winter. She flatly tells him she simply had other plans. It teaches us a very cold truth about human nature. Genuine indifference will always be a far sharper, more devastating blade than anger ever could be. Julian refuses to retreat, narrowing his eyes to claw back his lost dominance. He demands a name, choking on the primitive instinct to know who took what he believes is rightfully his. Ruby tries to sidestep him, but Julian closes the distance, suffocating her with his looming frame and sharp cologne. He starts tallying his romantic efforts like a bitter merchant, listing the rare book he bought, the custom suit, the exclusive table. To him, romance is just a coin you insert into a machine, entitling him to her affection. Julian arrived early due to a friend's plotting, while Ruby was delayed. We must always remember a simple truth. Treating affection like a calculated business transaction guarantees you will eventually end up morally bankrupt. Let's look at the tragic ballet of Ruby's rationalization. She first tries to de-escalate the clash by blaming their crossed timelines, a reflex to appease his rising temper. But then, a shadow crosses her face, and she brutally retracts her offer to reschedule. She is fully tethered to the Mafia boss now. Julian's jaw clicks shut, displaying the physical tremor of a shattered ego. He sneers, ripping into her timeline, refusing to believe a real bond could be forged in a single week. To him, this is just a frantic rebound from a failed social contract. Yet Ruby stands there, wrapped tightly in her delusion, entirely deaf to his logic. It is a haunting reminder of human frailty. A heart desperate for salvation will fiercely defend the exact illusion that is actively destroying it. Julian bitterly lists the research he compiled on her, waving his effort around like a receipt of his romantic worth. He treats human connection like a cold accounting ledger, and today he feels violently robbed. He demands the other man's name, needing a target for his humiliation. A healthy instinct would scream at Ruby to walk away. Instead, intoxicated by twisted defiance, she holds his gaze and drops the name. Dmitry Volkov. The shift is absolute. The angry color instantly drains from Julian's cheeks, replaced by the pale sweat of pure terror. He physically backs away from her. Ruby merely frowns, utterly blind to the lethal magnitude of her confession. Life repeatedly proves that stubborn arrogance, when mixed with willful ignorance, is the most dangerous poison a person can ever consume. All the bluster drains from Julian's spine. His voice plunges into a terrified whisper. He leans in, trying to crack her delusion, asking if she grasps the scale of the apex predator she is entertaining. When Ruby nods, Julian barks a hollow laugh. He paints the grim reality. The Volkov name is soaked in blood, rooted in a violent pathology that swallows normal people whole. We are witness the tragic moment where a mind willingly decorates its own slaughterhouse, mistaking a butcher's knife for a protective shield. Ruby digs in, flashing the eerie calm of early Stockholm syndrome. Julian's bruised ego evaporates into genuine pity. He begs her to run, teaching us an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, our most abrasive critics are the only ones actually trying to save our lives. Stick with me, guys. We need to look at Julian for a second. He is grieving the total collapse of a brilliant woman's logic, But Ruby does not waver. Bathed in the toxic glow of a trauma bond, she weaponizes Dimitri's capacity for extreme violence, twisting it into the ultimate proof of his protective love. It is a devastating strike against Julian's sanitized masculinity. His spine snaps straight just to hold his bleeding pride together. With hollow eyes, he delivers a chilling verdict. Monsters never grant their captives a happy ending. He walks away, leaving her trembling. But the devil has impeccable timing, right? Her phone buzzes. Dimitri casually summons her to lunch. We are starkly reminded here that the darkest cages in this world are always built with sweet invitations, never with iron bars. Let us unpack this absolute mess, because my jaw is on the floor. Dimitri calls a chill meeting to soothe her nerves, right? And Ruby, vibrating between pure panic and some deeply questionable attachment issues, warns him she is carrying heavy secrets. He just pours her a drink, the oldest trick to drop your guard. Fast forward to his glittering penthouse, and she folds. She drops every single warning Julian gave her, basically signing her life away in blood. Dimitri just sits there, soaking it all up with terrifying stillness. Then he leans in and calmly tells her Julian was 100% right to be terrified. The lesson here is brutal. Sometimes the sickest trap a toxic person can set is just telling you the ugly truth and sitting back to watch you willingly walk right into the fire anyway. Dimitri goes full surgeon mode, calmly breaking down his own toxic family tree. He straight up admits that hanging around him guarantees her absolute ruin. Here is where we see the scariest villain of all, the highly self-aware narcissist. He openly flexes his selfishness, talking about the war between his logic and his primal need to consume her. He literally whispers his plan to build a fortress around her, blocking out the sun so he becomes her only light. When Ruby points out, this sounds exactly like a hostage situation, the guy does not flinch. He just reaches out, his thumb tracing her hand, locking in that poison with a soft touch. Heartbreak teaches us something so real. The tightest chains in life are never made of heavy iron. They are made from a gentle, familiar touch that we are way too terrified to ever pull away from. Frame this shot with me because it is pure cinematic gold. The camera zooms in on his hands as he weaves a dangerously toxic spell. He is not promising Ruby a white picket fence or a safe tomorrow. He only offers the chaotic intensity of right now. His fingers lock with hers, creating a physical chain forged in the fire of her trauma. You can literally see the exact second her survival instincts just pack up and leave. She stares into those predatory eyes, finding this totally fake comfort, trading her actual safety for the illusion of being seen. Exactly. 14 days later, the bill for this dark bargain arrives in a sketchy manila envelope. It is a harsh truth we all have to learn. Sometimes, the choices that feel like a desperate lifeline are the exact same things that guarantee our total destruction down the road. The scene instantly flips to the boring office lighting. Ruby is at her desk, sweating bullet spittest, but trying to act perfectly normal. But let's be real, the past never lets you ghost it that easily. Her clueless bestie, Chloe, strolls into frame and drops an unmarked envelope on the desk. Just seeing no return address sends pure ice right through Ruby's veins. Chloe gives her a weird look, noticing the shaky hands she has been hiding all week. The second she is alone, Ruby rips that paper open and, boom, absolute nightmare reality. High-resolution stalker photos. Ruby and Dimitri eating, walking, whispering in his ride. Some hidden creep has tracked her every move. This proves a wildly tragic point about life. No matter how deep you bury things, your darkest secrets will always leave a muddy footprint for someone else to track. A typed note falls out, and it is dripping with nasty threats about ruining her whole life online. The camera focuses on her hands violently shaking. Her brain goes into overdrive, quickly ruling out her ex, Julian. His petty drama is way too sloppy for this level of stalker precision. No, this mess belongs 100% to Dimitri and his shadowy underworld. So what does she do? Driven by the absolute sickness of her trauma bond, she runs straight back to the guy who painted the huge target on her back. When she tosses the photos on his desk, Dimitri does not even blink. He spreads them out like a cold-blooded mortician, barely hiding the homicidal rage bubbling under his skin. It is a tragic reality we all eventually face. The so-called protectors we blindly run toward are usually way more dangerous than the enemies we are running away from. The vibe in the room drops below freezing as Dimitri kicks off his intense interrogation. He is demanding timestamps and crazy specific details. Ruby cries that the delivery guy was just some average dude, a total ghost meant to be forgotten. She is hugging herself, desperately trying not to fall apart, begging to know why this is happening. Dimitri's voice turns to absolute ice. He starts naming the bogeymen in the dark, rival mob families, ancient blood feuds, goons desperate for power. He makes her new reality brutally clear. She is not just his girl anymore. She is a massive glowing weak point in his armor. When she breaks down crying, apologizing for breathing, he yanks her wrist. Love built on total domination is a scam. It is nothing but a beautifully decorated, incredibly expensive cage designed to lock your soul away from the real world forever. A tiny flicker of actual guilt flashes in his eyes, but it is gone in a second, instantly swallowed by a terrifying promise to hunt these stalkers down. Now, normal people? A promise of absolute slaughter would make us sprint for the hills. Instead, the insane toxicity of their bond twists his violence into this cozy blanket of safety. She refuses to bail. Stepping right up to him, she gently cups the face of a literal mafia boss, willingly locking her fate to his massive red flags. Something inside the guy just breaks at her touch. He yanks her into this bone-crushing hug, whispering a crazy vow to burn the entire planet to ash before letting anyone take her. It is a wildly tragic human flaw. We constantly make the mistake of looking at a raging fire that will totally consume us, and believing it is just the desperate warmth we need to survive the night. Now watch how insanely fast the criminal underworld moves. Barely 48 hours later, Yuri stomps into the heavy silence of the study. His face is giving pure stone wall as he drops the intel. The stalker is Igor Morozov, a known rat working for the rival Sokolov crew. Yuri drops the bomb that they have been watching her for 3 weeks straight. The camera pushes right into Dimitri. His jaw is locked, veins literally popping under his skin. He turns to Ruby, his voice way too calm, and explains this messed up chess game. Viktor Sokolov is just poking the bear, testing to see if catching feelings has finally made the big boss soft. It is a wild reality check for all of us. In this incredibly unforgiving world, even the sharpest, deadliest swords will eventually rust out if you leave them exposed to the unpredictable mess of the human heart. Look closely at this next frame with me, because the illusion of choice is officially gone. Dimitri flat out orders Ruby to pack up and drop off the grid. Naturally, the last healthy brain cell she has left fights back. She stands her ground, desperately clinging to her normal life, her friends, her job, her cute little apartment. But a guy who runs a literal empire does not do compromises. Dimitri steps into the shadows and drops a terrifying reality check on her. He tells her those cute little things will mean absolutely zero when she is zipped up in a body bag. By flooding her brain with the pure panic of death, he completely wrecks her logic, setting himself up as her one and only savior. We always need to remember this. Fear is the absolute fastest way to break someone down, building heavy walls that we desperately mistake for a safe shelter. Notice the absolutely masterful, toxic shift in his game plan right here. When her raw fear crashes into her last bit of stubbornness, Dimitri switches it up and drops his tough guy act. He literally starts begging. He pleads with her to let him play bodyguard, dressing up his obsessive control as this beautiful, bleeding devotion. He commands her to cut off her bestie Chloe, telling her to fake a family emergency to ghost everyone. He whispers that just the thought of losing her is tearing his brain apart. This is it, guys. The final drop into total isolation. Ruby, totally blinded by her own desperate need to be loved, looks at this massive red flag and sees a romantic movie scene. She gives in. The truth is terrifying. The most inescapable traps in life are never made of cold steel, but from the desperate, crying pleas of the people we think we love. Yuri drives her off into the night like she is $1 million of stolen crypto. When the massive steel door of his luxury brownstone slams behind her, it echoes like a bank vault. This place is a straight-up fortress of hidden cameras and bulletproof glass, totally cut off from the real world. But as the camera circles her, we realize just how deep the brainwashing goes. She is facing expensive floors, totally stressing out, but she is not crying over her lost freedom. She is literally only worried about Dimitri getting hurt. Her brain has taken the heavy iron bars of her cage and spray painted them solid gold. It is a super dark reflection of human psychology. The absolute hardest prisons to break out of are never the physical rooms we are locked inside, but the tragic lies we painstakingly build in our own minds just to survive the painful truth. Inside this luxury prison, armed goons are standing around like absolute statues. Elena, the boss's own mother, glides into the room and just studies Ruby with these incredibly tired eyes. She flat out asks if Ruby would have signed up for this mess if she knew the bloody price tag. But Ruby immediately puts her shields up, completely infected by her toxic romance. She fiercely claps back, vowing she will never ditch him just because things are getting dangerous. She is literally dressing up her hostage situation like it is a romantic tragedy. Elena just quietly watches, clearly seeing the ghost of her own messy youth staring right back at her. It exposes a really harsh reality. History never just repeats itself quietly in the background. It violently demands a front row seat, perfectly willing to use our lives to replay its oldest tragedies. This is exactly where the toxicity takes root, guys. As the older Mafia generation teaches rookies how to embrace the bloodshed, Ruby begs to make sense of this terrifying reality. But Elena casually pours tea, flawlessly transforming into a mentor of madness. She recounts the violent history of her own mob marriage, framing the relentless gunfire and terror as some epic romance. She is literally teaching this girl to normalize the suffocating panic in her chest. Elena commands Ruby to trust no one outside their walls, insisting this isolation is the ultimate proof of loyalty. Paranoia gets rebranded as ride or die love. It leaves us with a chilling life lesson to remember. A shared delusion between two completely broken souls is often the most unbreakable bond you will ever find. The camera lingers on the heavy slump of Elena's shoulders. Living decades on the edge of a knife brings a soul-crushing exhaustion. She admits she is tired, yet instantly covers her deep wounds with romantic grandiosity. She describes eating a quiet dinner as a defiant victory against a hateful world. It is a terrifying psychological trick, magnifying basic survival to justify endless mafia horror. She literally survived her husband's bloody downfall purely on bitter spite. But right before the weight of this drops on Ruby, a piercing security alert shatters the air. Red lights start flashing violently across their pale faces. We have to remember this unyielding life lesson. True peace is merely a brief, cruel illusion for anyone who actively chooses to live by the sword. Picture the flickering hallway lights as the crisis finally breaks. The threat is neutralized, but when the boss returns, he is physically ruined. His suit hangs heavy, reeking of the dark scent of absolute violence. For Ruby, the biological response is instantaneous. A flood of dopamine completely washes away her fear. Elena murmurs a cold reminder that chronic paranoia is now her permanent shadow. Yet our girl only focuses on his sheer exhaustion. She refuses to see a ruthless Mafia monster. Instead, she sees a tragically beautiful god who just bled exclusively for her. It highlights a massive red flag we must all avoid. Listen to this life lesson. The most fatal mistake you can ever make is confusing a predator's physical fatigue for genuine emotional vulnerability. You and I can see the exact frame where her moral boundaries dissolve into ash. He leans in with a gravelly whisper, casually reassuring her that he only used persuasion instead of lethal force. He literally says, "There are no bodies." That insane admission should make anyone sprint for the exit, but her ethical compass is shattered. The camera pushes in close as she reaches out, her trembling fingers tracing his bruised jaw. She actually tells him she never cared about those other guys. Her entire universe has violently shrunk down to the heavy rhythm of his chest. It is a terrifying reality check. Here is the life lesson. When you prioritize a monster's comfort over the brutal reality of his crimes, you stop being a victim and morph into his silent, complicit partner. Watch how the emotional climax of this trauma cycle relies purely on physical exhaustion. They collapse onto that velvet mattress, fully clothed. Their ruined nervous systems are finally crashing after days of sustained panic. She presses her tear-stained face into his chest, confessing how she agonized over his safety. The megalomaniac offers a performative apology, but she swats it away, demanding only that he stay close. In a massive twist of fractured logic, she utterly dismisses his lethal nature. She weakly laughs, comparing his terrifying capacity for violence to some harmless inability to cook. It teaches us a grim, undeniable life lesson. The deepest psychological sickness always hides right behind the comforting, familiar mask of quiet domestic intimacy. 3 months later, the camera pans across the cold glass of their fortified penthouse. We have officially entered the chronic phase of her condition. She stares out at the city, interpreting her constant baseline of terror as an elevated, poetic state of living. She twists her mother's warnings, convincing herself that feeling every emotion at maximum volume is the only true way to be alive. This is the devastating tragedy of pure adrenal addiction. Her ordinary job is now just a hollow ghost acting through her numb fingers. Her only true reality is this luxurious, high-altitude cage. It forces us to digest a harsh life lesson. Once you become deeply addicted to the violent storm of toxic drama, a normal, peaceful life will only ever feel like you are suffocating. To survive this madness, she anchors herself to the mundane. Watch her grip her morning coffee mug like a literal lifeline. She stages petty arguments over breakfast to frame her bizarre mafia captivity as a normal romance. But the real world always bleeds through. Enter her co-worker, Chloe, acting as the ultimate reality check. Chloe squints, noticing her friend's hollow eyes and detachment, playfully calling the hidden partner her mystery man. Instantly, Ruby's throat tightens. She frantically builds a psychological wall to protect the violent ecosystem she now calls home. It reminds us of an unbending rule of human nature and a vital life lesson. The harder you try to hide a pitch-black truth, the heavier it becomes to carry on your shoulders every single day. Observe the sheer panic she feels over a simple dinner invitation. She is frantically compartmentalizing, hands trembling as she imagines her bright world colliding with the dark, blood-stained reality of her toxic life. She knows Chloe is sharp. One look, and Chloe will instantly spot the violent undercurrents dragging her friend down. Cornered by peer pressure, she caves and agrees to the dinner. When Chloe playfully asks if this secret boyfriend is simply weird, Ruby defensively snaps back, rebranding him as just intensely private. It exposes a haunting psychological truth and a crucial life lesson. We will always reshape the absolute ugliest facts into harmless little quirks, long before we are willing to admit we are sleeping next to a literal monster. Stick with me here, because this text exchange captures the absolute absurdity of their lives. She types furiously, literally begging this ruthless Mafia kingpin to play a harmless civilian for 2 hours. She explicitly forbids his looming bodyguards and natural urge to intimidate. He reads the screen, a dark smirk pulling at his lips. He knows that stripping away his dominance leaves nothing of his true self behind, yet he agrees to wear the mask. Across town, she stands before a mirror, frantically tearing through her wardrobe to construct the illusion of a healthy, functioning woman. But no matter the clothes, the life lesson remains crystal clear. You can never dress a living nightmare up in bright daylight and realistically expect it to pass for a normal, peaceful reality. Pacing the floor, she finally speaks the absurdity out loud. Her voice cracks, realizing she is dragging her innocent friend into the orbit of a dangerous criminal. He reaches out, smoothing her hair, flawlessly gaslighting her by claiming his terrifying reputation is just a formal sign of respect. He promises to be charming and blend in. But, guys, when those restaurant doors swing open, the psychological collision is deafening. Chloe sits at the table, her sharp eyes instantly tracking his bespoke dark suit, his predatory rolling gait, and the way waiters instinctively shrink away from a shadow. It proves a simple rule of nature and a powerful life lesson we must remember. A wolf can never truly hide its sharp teeth, no matter how softly it tries to walk among the rest of us. Let us look at this specific moment together, you and I. The tension at the table thickens into concrete as Dimitri steps into her old life. When Chloe leans forward, playfully prodding the mystery man for details, Dimitri deploys the flawless camouflage of an apex predator. He speaks in a soft, measured tone, fabricating a boring life in corporate logistics to kill suspicion. But Chloe is way too sharp. Her eyes narrow as her natural immune response flares up against the dangerous man hiding behind his expensive tie. She senses the absolute coldness radiating from his core. The human survival instinct is a beautiful thing, teaching us a profound life lesson. Always trust that sudden, unexplainable chill down your spine when someone seems just a little too perfect. The camera focuses on Ruby. Her cheeks flush as she rushes to cover the silence, frantically spinning a fictional story of their fateful meeting. She paints it as a charming mistake in a crowded bar, claiming she kissed her blind date. But beneath that crisp white tablecloth, out of sight, Dimitri asserts his physical dominance. His heavy hand clamps down hard on her knee. It is a tactile, suffocating reminder that she remains his captive. They both knew the fatal error of that chaotic first night, yet neither stepped back from the edge. Here lie the deep, rotting roots of her psychological trauma. It serves as a tragic life lesson for us all. A desperate, lonely heart will always try to rebrand a predator's calculated trap as an act of beautiful, serendipitous fate. Today, you and I are going to unpack this absolute madness together. Chloe is simply not backing down. Her gut is screaming at her to rip the mask off this mafia boss. But Dimitri is a masterclass in manipulation. With the ice-cold stare of a predator, he reaches across the table, grabs Ruby by the hand, and drops the ultimate plot twist. He says he loves her. That heavy drop completely flattens Chloe and her doubts. He just leans back, laughing like a normal dude, spinning fake stories about his awful cooking. It is a flawless, terrifying performance. And honestly, it brings us to a harsh but true life lesson. Real monsters do not hide in dark alleys waiting to jump you. Most of the time, they are sitting right across from you, smiling warmly while they pour your drinks. The very second this mob boss excuses himself, the tension in the room instantly shatters. Chloe lets out a massive breath, leaning over the table to give her reluctant blessing. She totally mistook his violently possessive mafia obsession for some deep romantic affection. Chloe still warns her best friend to watch her back, sensing the razor blades hiding under his smooth gentleman act. But guys, that warning is way too late. Ruby is already drowning in the deep end. She sees the glaring red flags, but she is holding onto the bars of her own cage with a death grip. It drops a heavy life lesson right in our laps. Sometimes people will fight tooth and nail to stay locked up, because the brutal heat of a monster they know feels way safer than the cold reality of walking away. Dimitri slides back to the table with the silent energy of a wolf reclaiming his turf. Chloe tries to act tough, throwing out a hollow threat about hurting him if he ever breaks her friend's heart. It is honestly hilarious, warning a literal hitman. He just flashes a cold smile, shutting her down completely. Fast forward a few weeks, and they are back at the Crimson Lounge. This mafia mastermind knows exactly what he is doing. He uses the red lights to trigger the memory of when he first trapped her, locking in that intense trauma bond. The life lesson here is dark but incredibly important. The physical places where our boundaries are first broken down will echo in our minds forever, tricking us into thinking that a room full of pure danger is actually a safe place to call home. The camera zooms in on the dark bar, catching the exact second the vibe flips. Ruby watches Dimitri drop his terrifying mob boss glare. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? The bartender slides their drinks over without a single word. All the background noise cuts out as the brutal truth hits her. Dimitri set up this romantic movie scene weeks ago, pulling strings from the shadows like an absolute puppet master. His hands are totally relaxed, completely in charge of the room. This brings us to a wild life lesson about power. For those who demand absolute control, in strict dominance is their only version of romance. A deeply broken heart will always look at a perfectly planned, inescapable trap and completely mistake it for true, genuine love. That warm lighting hits right as Dimitri leans in, his jaw physically shaking. He drops his voice into an intense whisper, feeding her a massive line about how shocked he was when she first touched him. He acts like a lost guy in the dark who finally found his spark. He stares dead into her eyes, spinning an insane web of manipulation, swearing he is the only guy who truly understands her. The camera blurs out everyone else, trapping them in their own bubble, exactly like his twisted plan. He is literally building a mental prison around her, brick by brick. Here is the brutal life lesson we all need to hear. Our completely desperate craving to feel understood can easily blind us to the terrible sound of a heavy metal padlock snapping shut right behind us. The click of that velvet ring box opening is literally louder than a gunshot right now. Dimitri pulls out the ring, and the light hits this massive diamond, highlighting the nasty scars on his face. He puts on the ultimate performance, playing the broken bad boy saved by an angel. He claims her pure vibe has rewritten his mobster soul. It is absolute cinema as he admits he is a monster, swearing he can never give her a safe life while promising to be her bulletproof shield. The collision of terror and insane romance is completely off the charts. But the life lesson hiding here is a bitter pill to swallow. The human mind is wildly adaptable. We will eagerly trade our total freedom for a locked cell, just as long as the guy holding the keys whispers that we are truly special. Ruby lets out a shaky breath, completely caving in to the gravity of his toxic world. The camera backs up as she slides that cold diamond onto her finger, literally tying herself to the most dangerous guy in the city. And get this, all the random people eating in the restaurant start clapping. It is the most painfully ironic thing ever. They are literally cheering for a sheep, willingly hugging a hungry wolf. Ruby has these huge, glossy eyes, fully believing she has finally found her real purpose inside this absolute chaos. This hands us a super brutal life lesson written right in her tearful smile. When you have spent your entire life freezing in the cold, the boring safety of a normal, quiet life is never going to beat the addictive, dangerous heat of a raging house fire. Stick with me, because the drama is going off the rails. We jump forward 6 months to their massive wedding. Golden sunlight makes this toxic trap look like a masterpiece. Chloe stands off to the side, stressing out, but buried under white lace and romantic music. The aisles are packed with massive Mafia hitmen in tailored suits, looking like stone gargoyles. At the altar, Dimitri watches his bride walk down. His mouth twitches with the smug pride of a hunter bagging his target. He even offers her a fake chance to back out at the last second. This drops a chilling life lesson about the world. Society is deeply obsessed with pretty aesthetics, and we will gladly decorate the most terrifying cages with the absolute finest white silk on the market. The officiant finishes speaking, his voice echoing loudly. This is the moment the transfer of ownership gets permanently locked in. Ruby, a girl who grew up completely unstable, has tied her life to a mob boss whose name makes grown men cry. As the fancy orchestra kicks in, Dimitri yanks her close. He brushes his lips against her ear, whispering super dark, forever promises. The way he grabs her waist is insanely possessive, blocking any chance of escape. We are watching a deeply messed up dance play out right here. The life lesson is seriously haunting. People who never had a safe home growing up will literally build their lives right on the edge of a cliff. They easily confuse the crushing weight of a predator with the steady ground they always wanted. A whole year flies by. The camera catches Ruby in this ridiculously fancy publishing office. The sun shines as she stares down at a new book submission. Her eyes dart over the pages, realizing this story perfectly mirrors her own toxic marriage to a mafia monster. A hysterical, unhinged laugh rips out of her throat. It is the ugly sound of a total mental breakdown. When Chloe runs into the room, Ruby casually wipes a tear away, claiming Dimitri gave her this manic joy. It is an insane display of totally surrendering your own mind. This brings up a rough life lesson about survival mode. Once your brain completely commits to living a massive lie, it will violently rewrite its own memories just to make the madness around you feel like a perfectly normal Tuesday. Guys, we are hitting a massive plot twist. You and I are going to watch this together, because this is where the tough guy act shatters. Ruby stands in their huge bedroom, hands shaking as she drops the bomb. She is pregnant. For the first time ever, the stone-cold facade of this mob boss implodes. Dimitri literally collapses inward. His massive shoulders shake, and real tears pour down his scarred face. It is a wild visual of a terrifying monster realizing his violent legacy is turning into an actual baby. This hits us with a profound life lesson. The strongest, most heavily guarded walls in the world are almost never smashed down by brute force. Instead, they are completely dismantled by the fragile, terrifying weight of bringing a brand new life into the world. The next few months are a chaotic blur. This ruthless mafia don throws his mob rules out the window, consumed by a wild need to protect his kid. The big finale hits in a quiet hospital room. Dimitri stares down at his newborn daughter. Her tiny chest is moving, a breathing trophy of their insanely toxic trauma bond. With his voice shaking, he names her Nadia, which translates to hope. You and I can both see the massive irony hanging in the room right now. We are watching a guy built on street violence aggressively reaching out for the brightest light possible. It leaves us with one final life lesson. Even the most completely corrupted people will desperately chase the sunrise, begging to hold on to one pure thing they could never actually be themselves. Look at this final shot, guys. Dimitri, the boss who tore through his enemies, locks eyes with Ruby with pure desperation. He straight up confesses she is the only one who took his shattered soul and glued it back together. Ruby completely breaks down. A massive sob rips out of her, washing away years of dodging bullets and non-stop betrayals. Right beside them, little Nadia opens her eyes for the very first time. They are that striking gray, proving their violent history just forged the ultimate twisted masterpiece. The insane storm outside finally dies down. You and I are sitting here after all this chaos, and it hits us with a real truth. Sometimes your most reckless mistakes are the exact fires you have to walk through. Those flames burn away all your broken cycles, guiding you out of the cold and straight to a true home.